Tampa Bay area, just like all cities in the U.S. large cities have traffic issues, and we're trying to help solve that problem by bringing a new form of transit technology to the Tampa Bay area. It's called aerial transit, and the vendor is a company called Skytran. So that's my initial. That's my main focus, and in the effort to bring aerial transit to the Tampa Bay area, and aerial transit, it's autonomous vehicles on a guideway. It's solar powered. It's point to point, on demand. There's a lot of aspects that I think people in general will find interesting and want to use the system. But once the system is created and it's networked throughout, say, the Tampa Bay area, we have to lease right away from the various municipalities in Pinellas County. There's 23 cities, plus the county and other agencies. So there's going to be a lot of different parties involved that will So, for instance, say if a passenger purchases a ticket, then the revenue has to be distributed to the various entities that we're leasing the guideway from. So the backbone system I can envision being a blockchain platform, and there's certain parallels between what's going on with RSong, whether it's a musician or a band that's having royalties distributed to each individual party in the band to be reimbursed for their efforts on creating the music. That's sort of the same methodology for what we're trying to do with aerial transit. It's, you have parties involved, they need to get paid, and once the payment is received, it's distributed, and you can go back and look at the history of all the transactions. So there's parallels in that regard. So I'm just kind of taking the prototype of RSong and repurposing it for another purpose.
Very good. This is exactly what we've been hoping would begin to happen. I think Fabian had a very similar insight with respect to ticketing in performances. That the Fabian, did you want to talk about that at all?
Sure, I'll touch on it briefly. Just I recognize that with what we're building out with RSong, there's multiple use cases for it. And I think with what we're working towards accomplishing with RSong really is just if we can get the first thing done, which is here's the song, here's the distribution of people's earnings off of that one thing. If we can prove that and create and have those users have their cryptocurrency wallets attached to their to those virtual assets, we can then use the program and use that for tickets or use that for a whole variety of things, photography, video game assets. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. So the first test right now is to get RSong up and running and to prove once and for all that we can do this with music. And once we can achieve that and once we could prove it, we could then kind of morph the technology into being applied into multiple different industries.
I really liked your the insight here, though, that there are some time-bound resources like a ride on a transit, some kind of transit system, or the admission to a particular venue for a particular time. These time-bound resources as assets, and assets that may have multiple stakeholders that need to be paid off. I think that's that's an important recognition. And so this particular design pattern of a time-bound asset that has multiple stakeholders is one that works for ticketing in performance venues, ticketing for transport, and a whole host of other kinds of applications, whether they're access to access to a trading floor, or the design pattern is very, very general, and so we can tackle it, you know, a, 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 in its sort of purest form. But the one difference is, of course, this time bound aspect of it, which I think an important one to think about carefully, right? Because um, is it only a one-time use that's good forever versus, you know, a concert happens. And so for example, you can imagine that you purchase a ticket on a public transport system, and as long as the public transport system is running, you can redeem that ticket. So yeah, ostensibly, or for all intents and purposes, that access is granted in perpetuity. Whereas in the case of admission to a concert, the concert happens on a particular date for a particular period of time, and then that's it. The ticket is, you know, no longer viable. The same with an potentially with you know, and the place where this is these two overlap would be on something like an airline ticket, right? So it's a transport system, but the slot that you're purchasing is time bound. So that the time bound portion of this adds a new flavor requirement that I think is useful and interesting to consider, because there's a cliff in terms of the value. Beyond a certain point, there is no value to this thing, and so, you know, there may be differences in the way we approach the economics, um, uh, well, for things that have cliffs like that. Um, does any of that make sense?
Yes, that was very good. Thank you.
Uh, cool, cool.
Hey,
Yeah, I
hey,
think.
Greg, while you were talking, I'm thinking, because you know, concert tickets, once you're at the venue, right, that ticket no longer grants entry, but those kind of tickets increase as collectibles. So, you know, you could almost have a time in a smart contract where the entry value of a ticket is over, but now a collectible value and proof of that value continues, you know, into the future.
That's an interesting point, especially if it becomes an access to other assets, right? So, for example, if you could link the ticket to photos that the concert goer took, or other kind of memorabilia that the
Mhm.
concert goer collects as a result of being a part of the experience,
I think
right?
I
Go
think
ahead.
there's an ultimate play here, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Greg, but in terms of what a potential ecosystem could look like on chain, where you've got music connected to tickets, connected to everyone that's at the show is filming the concert, how all of the data that is in the phone can establish the timeline that allows for, you know, Nora went to go see Kamasi Washington perform. It's been recorded on chain that she promoted it to her friends. 10 of her friends bought tickets to the show. That's been recorded. She gets rewarded for that. She gets to show up to the venue. Something shows up on her phone and says you can get a free beer for it. She films the show. She uploads it onto the RSong streaming platform. Everyone that bought tickets to that show, or everyone that attended the show, uploads that video content onto you know, basically onto a decentralized YouTube. Everyone is then able to, the fans are able to create their own video from the show. The content that's used from Nora's phone, we recognize she has 5 minutes worth of content that's up there. She's rewarded for it. So there's a whole deeper tokenomics aspect that I've been spending quite a bit of time thinking about and jotting down ideas of what can happen. But yeah, and it all rolls back to the song. If the song is correct, we could build the ticket. If we can get the ticket correct, we can start building and building and building all these other aspects that are attached to it.
Capitol Records used to have, I don't know if they still have it, but I know that they used to have something. It started after I was working for them, so I don't really know exactly what it was called, but it was a sort of similar system where they had this like sort of street team of kids,
Mhm.
teenagers, who were super fans of people like Katy Perry and and the Gorillas and stuff. And I don't know if they were directly paid It's capital, so probably not. Haha, just kidding. But I think that they were like rewarded for doing special things. Like basically, they were kind of promoting them for free for like little access
Yep.
points in there. But it was a really interesting thing. I wonder if they're still going. I have to remember what it was called, but it was basically like this type of system that you're talking about. And a lot of it was plugged into social media, you know, like if you retweet something a certain amount of times, blah, blah, blah. Anyway.
Yeah, a lot of the majors have kids, specifically in universities across the country, that they'll have the Universal team, the Columbia team, the Sony team, whatever it is, and those teams. And this is across most college campuses. I've engaged with these before for promoting records, and those kids are there, and they get free CDs, free tickets to the event, backstage passes, you know, all the perks that come along with promoting the event and promoting the artist as soon as a record comes out. So, and right now, I mean, look, if the Crown were performing a show over in Seattle, within a couple of calls, we can get a street team, independent, hired to go and hand out posters and flyers. So there's street teams everywhere that can execute on those types of things.
Yeah, yeah. But I think we need to be a little bit parsimonious. I mean, I agree that it's good to deliver one thing before moving on to another. But I think we do need to be pretty parsimonious about the requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the last couple of calls, we've had some really productive and good conversations about the requirements at the interface for onboarding audio content. But I want to argue that access to a particular transit system is not the same. So like there's no content per se that has to be onboarded with the same kind of care that the audio content has to be. So like for example, with a ticket, there may be some visual content that is associated with it, like some kind of graphics.
Mm-hmm.
That like in the case of the Seattle Orca card, there may be some graphical assets that go with the electronic distribution or token that recognizes your asset, your access to the transit system. But basically, there's no authenticity requirement, there's no provenance requirement, and there's no intellectual property tracking that has to take place there, right? Basically, the ticket itself is the representation of the access to the service, and there's no additional content associated with it. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to be super careful about how we think about these requirements.
Yeah, I think starting with the more draconian content management rights is going to be very helpful in the long term, because it's the most complicated of the use cases we have. Bearer bonds, like this, whoever's got the ticket's got the ticket, right? You're absolutely right. That'll be easier. So, I know Kayvon was asking about running out the use cases. So yeah, Fabian, and I'm just waiting for Fabian to come off holiday. Good to see you, Fabian. And our plan is to run up a proposal and then start documenting these use cases, and plugging away at this, because it opens up a whole ecosystem on its own.
This is Kevin. I'd like to maybe reverse it a little bit. Instead of coming up with proposals and then doing the use cases, maybe doing the use cases so we figure out what it is that we're trying to build, and then coming up with the proposals.
Well, the use cases, the use cases are going to be part of the proposal, but obviously, we're going to need to get a team together to do this work, and we're going to need, funding to be able to do that. So
I agree, but I mean, I love these meetings, but I also want to walk away from these meetings with something in my hand that I can say, oh, last week we talked about this, and we're building on it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
no,
I think,
we're on the verge, Kayvon.
Yeah.
And we're getting there.
And I think coming up with just simple bulleted items of use cases, like as a user, I need to be able to buy tickets, and then we could have sub items in there. I don't think we need to wait for a team to to assemble a team to be able to do this.
No, I agree with you on that point. But I think a lot of this discussion it is like I'm experiencing it as very productive because the thinking through um, the different aspects of onboarding the material has been very helpful for me in terms of seeing the overall map of the landscape. I really believe that the conversation around um, whether or not there's a fairly heavy human interaction element at the onboarding of audio content it's a make or break for the RSong offering. And that discussion I think has really surfaced a lot of interesting stuff. One of the things that I would like our chain in general and our chain dApps more specifically to uh, move in the direction of to break a trend is the faceless automated service. I think the more we begin to interject humans and human intelligence into this, the culture of providing this service, the more we're going to be rightly positioned. That, like, I don't know if anyone has ever had any trouble with their Gmail, but as soon as you have trouble with your Gmail, that's when you discover how difficult it is to reach Google.
Does anyone ever reach Google? Google is not known for customer support.
Not at all. And it's all beta software, right? I mean, have they ever actually had a 1.0 product release?
That's exactly so. Like when the co-op was attacked a year ago, right? So someone impersonated me, walked into an AT&T store and said, "I'm Greg Meredith. I've had a problem with my phone. My phone's been stolen. Can you swap out my SIM card?" So that's what they did to launch the attack. And some unsuspecting, they probably went to several AT&T stores before they found someone who was so overloaded that they didn't do proper ID check, and got a SIM card, which then invalidated my SIM card, right? And then once they had that, Gmail was the one thing I didn't friggin' have two-factor authentication turned on for. And because of that, they could then do password resets to a whole bunch of accounts and and grab control of a variety of services that I had, right? And so I really needed to reach Google. It was really important. Fortunately, internally, the co-op had a bunch of internal protocols, which I won't talk about, that meant that it was difficult for them to penetrate any further into the co-op and steal a bunch of money. Um, uh, uh, so it was stymied there, but it definitely cost the co-op, and it caused us a problem. But at that moment, I really, really needed to talk to Google, um, and and it was only because I had friends who were Google employees or previous Google employees. I was able to get into the organization and get things accelerated and turned around. Otherwise, things could have gotten much worse. And so I'm using this personal story, this personal example, to talk about a trend that I think we want to move towards, which is more people, more personal interaction. In a time when we're considering, basic personal income, that trend is uh, has to do with whether or not people are finding themselves in in situations that represents meaningful work. And I think, for a lot of the blockchain dApps, and a lot of the blockchain ecosystem, people can find themselves in meaningful work, and a lot of that meaningful work has to do with being able to connect with people and relate to people. And I think there's no better place, than at the outset of an arts and entertainment service like RSong, where people really care about their music, right? And so getting more people involved in building out an actual social network, not a virtual social network, is something that is important to us. And again, I've related this before, but the knock-on benefits of having done a lot of human interaction, for the KYC, for the co-op's private sale, was that we gained a lot more investor trust, and we gained a lot more engagement from the arching community at the outset, because people were involved with other people. They could see their faces, they could have conversations. And I think that while it may look like it doesn't scale, initially, there's a different kind of scaling that we want to do. And that's so all of that thinking came out of this discussion around the requirements of onboarding. And so I feel like this is a very, very productive conversation. But I would also like to get some feedback from the community about how they feel about this particular issue.
I I love this discussion as it starts to touch onto identity. And I'm kind of curious how this might roll out. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of multifactorial identity, where the people that you come in touch with all give you some additional accreditation, or perhaps they all contribute some stake towards whatever avatar you've created. So when that stake reaches, say, a certain level, that might buy you entry or give you access to submit some content. And then if that content gets taken down, then maybe you lose that stake. So then you have the option. You can contribute your own stake in order to reach the threshold where you can contribute content, or have the support of those who know you and support you to reach that threshold and put it in jeopardy. Might be lost if it turns out that the content is not yours, or if you break the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And then the human interaction. I mean, so it's simple at the outset, just giving someone the some tokens, whatever, the ability to publish. But then there'd be a lot more interaction if there's a challenge, and how the governance would work about the legal process of is this content really yours, and what's the process for challenging the legitimacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts from anyone else? Like, I know, Fabian, you have been advocating for less human interaction, more sort of automated uploads. Do you have any further thoughts, like, after having thought about it over the holidays?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are systems that are in place that we just need to identify what they are and what would serve the platform best. Because there's no way that Spotify or CD Baby or any of these entities are interacting with people who are uploading music. I'm sure there's a couple of instances, I know, that where people upload songs that might not belong to them, but there are systems that are in place that are able to identify the music that is being uploaded. We've used the example: what if someone claims they're David Bowie and they're uploading David Bowie? There are systems that are there to prevent that from happening. So I think a high touch KYC process will could potentially slow down the process of onboarding musicians. But before, again, even getting there, I'm still thinking about the first 100 songs. And with the first 100 songs, because we are directly going to be picking up the phone and emailing these musicians, it's we know that they're the real people that are bringing their music to the platform. But when it does expand into something much grander, and the doors are wide open for everyone to get involved, hopefully we will have identified a technological solution that'll prevent from individuals of faking who they are.
Also, I was reminded of something very funny that happened a couple of years ago with a band that I know called Wolfpack. And they uploaded a silent album to Spotify, and they asked their fans to stream it a ton just while they were sleeping or whatever. And they made, I mean, not a ton of money, but thousands of dollars. And then Spotify found out. Obviously, they took it down, but it was sort of like there's a bunch of YouTube videos about it, why they did this and how they did it, and it was obviously fraud. But I think they were trying to make a point about how easy it is to kind of cheat the system. And since streaming has become the sort of currency of our time, it's very interesting to see them make that point. Not at all condoning people committing fraud, just saying very interesting, bizarre thing to do. So
yeah, doesn't John Cage have the copyright on that silent song?
4 minutes and 33
4
seconds.
minutes and
33 seconds.
No, I don't know. Yeah. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. I forget how long it's supposed to be.
33.
Okay.
4 minutes and 33 seconds.
Thank you. Okay.
Actually, I mean, again, I keep wanting to bring it back to the human and the qualitative. And so I'll try to do this obliquely. I remember a performance by the band Zoom. Nora, you met Shinkaro and Luciano and Zoom, the Zoom players, some back in the Tiny Orchestral Moments, and they did a performance of 4 minutes and 33 seconds at a workshop that I was at, and it was one of the most moving things ever because they were silent. They were actually silent, and they were actually silent for 4 minutes and 33 seconds without looking at their watches, which is an incredible performance event. To bring silence into a space is a remarkable thing. So I think there can be other subversive uses for silence, but Nora, as a musician, do you want a service where it's completely automated? You don't have to talk to somebody. You just upload your stuff. But the flip side is, if something goes wrong, you can't get to anybody.
Well, I mean, no. Obviously, you want things to you want things to work. You don't want to need customer service, but if you do need it, you want to be able to get it. Obviously, Spotify tried to sort of bridge this gap in their own sweet way by launching this Spotify for artists, Spotify for creators. Fabian, what's it called? Anyway, it's this app, and if you're an artist on Spotify, you get on your phone, and it kind of gives the artists like a separate portal into their information where you can because it used to be that they just filled in all this metadata for you, and they would get a lot of things wrong all the time. Wrong picture, wrong album artwork, like all sorts of weird stuff would happen. So they kind of tried to solve that a little bit, but I definitely don't feel that if you're an artist and you're using Spotify or you're using Amazon to publish a book like I did earlier this year, you definitely don't have any option. You kind of have to go the way that you did with your Google thing, Greg, which is like, okay, who do I know that can actually help me with this? And you don't want to, as a customer of these platforms, it's not great to know that you have to rely on your own personal network
rather than the company itself to solve your problem. So in short response, no, I don't want everything to be automated because too many things can go wrong. You know?
Well, so the other thing that I'm thinking about is that I feel like we're really not tapping into the potential of decentralization.
Mm.
And I feel like we're not thinking about this from the perspective of the decentralization. We're still trapped in a kind of Web 2.0 super automated world, and I don't think that's the world we want to live in. So what if RSong, is more like a living organic system, and it like there's a small community that takes on the work of onboarding a certain number of artists, and then when they reach a certain threshold, the people that they've onboarded, they part of being onboarded, they've made a commitment to onboard others, right? And so then it isn't, so it grows more like an organic system. And they,
how Facebook was supposed to start, like you need an invite from someone you know.
something like that.
But
Yeah.
obviously it went very wrong. But
Yeah, but you understand what I'm saying? It's like the
Invitation process. I like that idea a lot, Nora. That is a good one, because then it gives you gives everybody a certain level of exclusivity. Like you got to be invited to be a part of it for the beginning, at least. Because if we have high level marquee artists from the start, and those artists like the experience and like the quality of what it is that we're putting forward, and are also into the gamification, tokenization of how this ecosystem is going to work. Once they start inviting their friends, it'll just start to spread organically that way before it's left wide open to everybody under the sun to get involved. I think
exactly.
With a certain caliber of decently recognized musicians that can attract others to the platform.
Yeah. So and I think we it's going to take a while to learn the turn of mind that is decentralization. And so I feel like we have to take every opportunity that we, every chance we get to say, is there a decentralized way of doing this that maybe, suits our needs, that bridges this gap between scaling and between the need for more human touch, more human agency, intelligence, and wisdom.
I see. I see a couple. Yeah, I see a couple ways of scaling where one, you have initially high touch. RSong is doing all of the vetting and the verification of the creator submitting the content, and then as we scale, accrediting other agents to do that vetting. But the other way we might scale, which is more decentralized, is to decentralize the responsibility for that content. So in other words, not having just one RSong, but having other agencies out there that are responsible for that material that's been submitted. I mean, they're the ones that have to maybe conduct the DMCA takedown if there should end up being some rights issue.
No, I think I see where you're going. I think one of the things that we're touching on, though, is that when the network of artists know who does what, right? Like Nora knows John Batiste, so she's much more likely to be able to say, "Yeah, that's a John Batiste piece. I can vouch. Yeah, this is John's work." Right. And then John, he knows, I don't know, who does he know? Who does he know, Nora?
So Greg, I'm curious though, in addition to, so when you say vouching, could you maybe elevate that a little bit and say vetting, or I'm sorry, vouching, perhaps staking as well?
Yeah, so I'm not at the point where I have worked out a reputation style staking. I like the direction of the thinking, but I have to think about it a bit more. Like when you and I were thinking about scenario.
Yeah.
one of the things that I felt really strongly about was that reputation is not a token, right? Like, it's not fungible. It has to be calculated. Whereas, token, the essential thing about a token is that it's fungible, right? Whereas with reputation, like I may have a reputation with you, but it's not necessarily the case that I have a reputation with someone that is one of your friends, right? So and like sometimes you can come and vouch for me, but it may be, but it's a little bit more of a tenuous connection, right? So I don't think reputation is as directly translatable into a tokenized system. There's a notion of scoring that I think can work, but I'll be honest, I think that there are scoring mechanisms that are probably better suited uh, to the reputational space that don't use just straight up arithmetic. I think if you use more sophisticated linear algebra, like would include a tensor product, which would enable some kind of entanglement, I think you'll be able to more faithfully model various reputational phenomena. But I don't want to go in that direction for this conversation because gets really technical really fast. But I'd like your thinking a lot.
So my thinking is coming from the perspective of, if there's a problem, if there's a challenge, who's responsible for maintaining the system?
Yeah.
And if it's just RSong, that's a lot of expense and responsibility. I mean, we were complaining earlier about how Google's customer service sucks. We don't want that for RSong. So how can we scale?
But I think one of the nice things is that our chain as a platform is sharded, and you can tie data assets to shards, right? So you can say within this particular shard, this group has taken on responsibility for the integrity and validity of the data.
That's what I
Right.
wanted to hear. Yeah.
Right. And then another community, they may use some of the RSong assets, like the front end, for example, or some of the back end infrastructure, but they're a separate shard. And so they then take responsibility for the data on that shard. And then the two shards can come up with certain kinds of agreements, and those agreements can be tokenized. Is that moving more in the direction of what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you run into some questions on the, how you slice it, and at what point, you're calling it RSong or perhaps, some other service.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to circle back now to Kayvon, because Kayvon had some interesting points about the productivity of these conversations. Like from my experience, this feels very productive, although I think it's a little bit non-linear in terms of how we're touching on the requirement space. But what's your experience, Kayvon? I mean, does this feel productive to you?
No, it absolutely does. I mean, the last thing I want to do is walk away from these meetings and build the wrong system.
I totally hear you, but I also
sure, just kidding.
but I also recognize that sometimes these sort of non-linear requirements walks look a bit random to various kinds of thinkers. But I feel like there's a holism to well-crafted systems that sort of creates an appearance of non-linear random walks through the requirements, but it's because things are connected in funny ways, unexpected ways.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, because they bleed into each other, right? No matter how hard we try to partition our system, but they interact. And
yeah,
and you know, realizing or minimizing the potential for change by going through this analysis definitely helps. My thing is though that I guess I don't remember stuff the way I used to remember stuff in my 20s, and I like to walk away with something written that I can say,
Yeah.
oh
Dave,
yeah, we talked about this.
Yeah, Dave, I'll just chime in and say that I think the purposes of the Friday calls have helped us shape a lot of ideas and also open the call to folks that are outside of our chain. While you know, we established right before the holidays that every Mondays we're having an RSong work group where we're actually taking steps around the actual work that we need to do. And you were sent an invitation for it, but I don't know, you haven't responded to it yet, which is supposed to be on every Mondays at 3 o'clock. And I can ask Lilia to resend that invitation over to you so you can join us on Mondays for that call.
Oh, I'll definitely join. I apologize for not responding to that earlier. I don't check my co-op email as much as I should, so I'll definitely get there, check that, and respond.
Great, and that way you can be on that call on Monday and we can discuss it. And I'll also just chime in and say that you know, I spent some time looking at this document that you sent, this chart, and I'm happy to say I actually understand it. It took me a little while to really look at it and spend time with it, but I understand it. And I also think I have a couple of things that I want to add to it that will help us around how the smart contracts will what kind of data is going to be on the smart contract and how that will trigger payments to the various shareholders of the songs.
Fantastic. Yeah, so circling back to what Greg, you were talking about from the user interaction. I think the system could do both, right? Parts of the system would be automated or would treat everything as if, for the lack of better term, would be treating everything as cattle and would be automated.
Mm-hmm.
And then part of a system would be, like you said, heavy user interaction. We treat everything as pets. We name them. We make sure that it's very personalized, but we don't have to choose, right? It could be.
Yes, that's correct. That's exactly right. The one thing though is that when you have this sort of parallel bimodal approach, you have an integrity issue, right? You have a correlation and an integrity issue that comes up, right? So here's a system that I can imagine, right? So Johnny English decides that he wants to release some material on RSong, and there's a website. It takes his initial information and allows him to upload his stuff. And as a part of the automated system, we go and utilize some provenance solutions that check the audio content files for potential copyright infringement, and so it passes kind of initial muster, but um, uh, uh, it's not immediately in the wider network. Maybe it's available in a holding network that is so certain people who listen to the newest, freshest stuff can see it, but the wider network can't see it because there's another KYC like process that Johnny English has to go through, where he proves that he is who he is, and he presents evidence to a human being that he has the rights for this material. And then once that process has taken place, then the system opens up, and that the material can be propagated out through the rest of the network. So and then that way you can continue to maintain a correlation between the automated stuff and the human vetted stuff.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I was actually just going to say, it's not all or nothing. So Google has taken the approach of nothing, but Amazon, I'm a big user of Amazon. You can actually call them and talk to their very competent customer service people when you have issues that can't be taken care of online. And I think they have actually done a really great job of providing both. Like, I don't know what the number is, 98% of it is all online and automated. But for those that drop out and need some kind of human interaction, they have people available.
Well,
Yes.
Greg was talking about more of, it sounded like kind of a community vetting, but Greg, in your Johnny
Yeah, I'm
English.
not a big fan of community vetting.
Well,
I know you are, and I
no, wait. I don't know if I am or not, but
Okay, so
in
can
the
I
Johnny, I just wanted to finish in the Johnny English story, just where the money fits in. So Johnny English is, I mean, is he doing all of this without any money flowing, or is he paying to have his song ingested in the first place? So
Yeah, so there would be some cost initially to because there's a cost to whoever's standing up that shard, right? So again, the picture that I have in my mind is there's a tree of shards, across which the material can be propagated after it reaches a certain threshold of vetting. So there's an initial holding shard, and it costs money to put data on that shard. So Johnny pays a portion to put this stuff up on that shard uh, for uh, for initial vetting, and then after he's gone through more vetting, but because it's only on that shard, Johnny can't reach the full extent of the potential audience, right? So Johnny can't get any money for engagement with his content. um, uh, so Johnny is motivated to get through the vetting process. um, so then the vetting process comes around. Johnny is vetted by whether it's a community or some other authority. Johnny is vetted by that authority, and as a result of that vetting process, the material is released to the rest of the tree of shards. And because it's released to the rest of the tree of shards, Johnny can now potentially receive remuneration for engagement with his content. That's the way I was thinking about it. Does that make sense?
yeah. Well, I love Johnny's stuff, and I'd like to help sponsor him to get through that
Yes.
vetting process.
Mhm.
Yeah, but okay, so this is what I want to say. There is a danger in all this community stuff that you end up with clicks, and I don't know Johnny English, but if I hate him and I could get 100 people in the community to hate him, even though, then now I have the majority, and now it becomes very subjective, right? Now you could say all systems end up to that kind of subjectivity. But I think if this, and this all goes back to governance, right? But I always go here. I don't know why, but you end up with neo Nazis running your community, because they have the money, they have the numbers. What happens to your system? And so I think we need to be careful. Anytime we want the community to vote on whether somebody is, really who they say they are, or if it's worthy of being included, or, even like that Facebook model, it reminds me of BJ's, right? BJ's was this big, like Costco kind of thing. And early on, you had to be invited by somebody in order to join so you could shop and give them your money, which was kind of crazy, right? So I just, I'm not saying it's necessarily not the way to go, but I think we have to we have to go into it with eyes wide open and realize that there's all kinds of potential for these systems to go awry.
You know,
So
my sponsorship isn't going to, you know, increase his reputation. It's just going to give him some more fuel to get through the process, and, you know, maybe even I'll get a little slice in the end.
right, but I think what Ned is saying is, imagine that you have a coalition that is controlling an entry point shard, and they have a particular agenda. So let's, you know, so we can imagine that there's a so let me point to a particular example that's happening in the world today. I've only recently become aware that the Uyghur Muslims, these Turkic Muslims, are being there are over 1 million of these Turkic Muslims in internment camps in China. And the reports coming back from the Muslim community is that they are being made to reject their religion, embrace atheism, and you know, and the reports that I have watched on video from this is that for the people who have died in these internment camps, their remains are being burned so that there's no forensic evidence. So I bring this up in this context to suggest that there are still it is still possible to have these kinds of government-sponsored coalitions that target particular audiences. So you could imagine that Cat Stevens, you know, Yusuf, tries to release a new album, and there's a government-sponsored coalition, so they're deep-pocketed, and they control that entry point. I think this is the way I'm interpreting Ned's comments, and as a result, they deny Cat Stevens entry through the system, not because he can't prove the legitimacy of his rights to the content, but because they don't accept the proof because they have a different agenda.
Yeah, and you know, really even closer to home, you know, two gay people walk into a bakery and want a cake, and then the person rejects that, and now that person who rejects it goes to every other bakery, right, and says you have to reject that.
Yeah, but nobody dies if they don't get their frickin' cake. I mean, you know.
Yeah, but it's the point of hatred, and
No, I know.
and now the system that you created is propagating this hatred. And now,
okay, so yeah, but this is where so Ned, my response to this is where decentralization matters, because the coalitions can't control every entry point. And so if an artist like Cat Stevens or Nora Germain, they are highly motivated to get their content into the hands and ears of people who are receptive and responsive to their offering. So they start their own shard, and they get their own community going, and that becomes a different entry point into the system.
yeah, no, I agree 100% if it's fully decentralized. Yep.
Yeah. So the decentralization, I think, gets around the kind of problem that you're talking about. And this is what I was talking about before. So I really like your challenge because it's very important to think through. But I also think that it's another one of these places where we have this significant opportunity to think in a decentralized manner, and we really need to stretch our brains that way. And if we don't keep exercising the decentralization muscles, we're not going to build scalable, like viable scalable systems.
So the example that you gave, Greg, reminds me of a conversation I had at a conference in Singapore back in August, where I met a fellow who wanted to make a halal blockchain. And so we were talking about our chain, and he basically wants to set up a halal ordering and provisioning for groceries in all of Asia. And he said, well, what about, my customers are going to be concerned that my shard not touch a Jewish shard, for example.
So I guess one of the things that is very, very differentiating for our chain is that with the behavioral types, we can actually prove that information doesn't cross certain channels. So you can actually get proofs at compile time of exactly those kinds of requirements. This community never learns that information.
Yeah, we have our other meeting.
Yeah, we have our staff
But
meeting.
this is a really, I think, important topic to drill down even more.
Yeah, I agree. So hopefully we're continuing to feel like these meetings are productive and that we're really getting to the requirements of the system.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
do.
taking notes. I'll send those over.
Okay, thank you. Nora, did you want to participate in the staff meeting? I'm taking it as awesome.
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, Christian, would you mind publishing the Zoom room or yeah, or could someone send Nora the link rather than
I'll text it over to her.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see everyone on the staff meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.